My name is Joseph Garcia. I'm from Riverhorse. Mike was supposed to chair this, but he's had to do something else, so I hope I'll be adequate enough. So, from full-blooded straight doc animation, docs like Waltz with Bashir, to visual and graphics used to visually convey ideas or information, as in feature docs like Waiting for Superman, or in the BBC Three series, How Drugs Work. The scope of what can be done with animation opens up new ways of storytelling that just isn't possible with traditional documentary. So I'd just like to introduce you to JP Hersey, who's a co-founder of HD Films. He's done work for several broadcasters, Factual and Drama, and recently developed the new titles for Granada's iconic Coronation Street. JP, do you want to just tell us a little bit about your clip? And
yeah, hello. There's a clip coming up from our company which just shows a broad overview of the kind of stuff we've done over the last 12 months, and also some clips from before that, when myself and my business partner Andy Goldie were working for another company that went pop basically last year in April. So we set up our company, keeping the clients together and trying to keep the core talent that we had at the previous company together, and through gritted teeth we've managed to get through a year. So we're very happy to be here, and we'll just show these clips and then ask any questions you like about them afterwards, or whatever you want to do, get to throw the other ones and then have an open discussion.
What we'll do is we'll introduce each of you, we'll watch your clip or introduce your clip, and then I'll ask a few questions. Great. And then at the end, when everyone's done, we can open up to the floor.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So
it's a bit hard to see because it's quite dark, some of the shots, but hope you get a general feel for it.
We can see it here. Some pretty stunning stuff there. Would you describe yourself as an animator, since it's Meet the Animators?
Yeah, no. Not really. I started out as a graphic designer. I joined the BBC in the early 90s as a graphic designer, and then computers had only just come in, actually, so I was working on the very sort of first broadcast computers, doing 2D stuff. But you learn through that, you learn the techniques of layering, and all these shots really are just layer upon layer different stuff. So you kind of learn the principles of it. And I joined the previous company as what they would call a creative, I suppose. Excuse me. So it was more about being an intermediary between the client and the animator to meet the expectations of the client, but also make sure that it's within budget and it looks good. So I describe myself now as a VFX supervisor or VFX producer. So I don't actually use the kit. I've not used it enough recently to be just across all that, because you spend your time going to clients and doing that, being that role. So I don't actually animate, but we've got a team of animators who work for us and do the clever stuff.
Right, okay. And you mentioned budgets, so what kind of budgets are we talking about for, say, like the high end?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting one. I mean, it's we often get asked how much will it cost for X. We often go back and say, well, how much have you got? Because so often it's about doing it that way round, and us coming up with some sort of solution, some sort of creative solution to meet the requirement of the show, keep the drama, keep the narrative going, and hopefully make it look good. We're doing something at the moment for a little company, a production company in Manchester, about ninjas, which is really cool. And they started out with a £50,000 CGI budget, and it's now 15. So every meeting I had with them, it went down 5K. And, you know, of course, the expectation doesn't go down that much. So there's a lot of politics going on that you've got to deal with. And we're actually doing the show for him for 15K. So I would say that was kind of bottom end. But again, if you get 15K for one shot, that's pretty good. If you get 15K for 30 shots, it's not so good. So it's really, every single show is a bespoke product in a sense. And that's the hard thing about this industry, I guess, that it is bespoke. You're not just churning out the same thing again and again. Each project has its own challenges, aesthetically and fiscally. So it's, I guess that's the hard thing about it. But they can range from 15 up to, we're doing one at the moment, which is a £165,000 budget. So they all throw up their different challenges.
And do you work with a lot of independent filmmakers?
We do, yeah. We do. We work for the BBC, ITV, but also a lot of independent producers who work for the BBC or Nat Geo and Discovery. A lot of our work's for Nat Geo and Discovery, who commission UK companies to come up with documentaries.
And do you ever sort of jump into a project where there might not be any funding or upfront funding? Would you do any development work with?
Again, I think it depends on the project. We haven't done that for ourselves at the moment. The previous company I worked for tentatively looked into that. Clearly it's risky, but it's not, of course, without question. I mean, it entirely depends on the project and the viability of that, business viability of that. But it's something that we wouldn't certainly rule out doing, certainly not, yeah.
And what kind of projects do get you excited?
I love big dramatic productions, more perhaps than animation itself. I love the sort of documentary dramas where they're almost verging into doing drama. We'd like to do more drama. We specialise, I guess, in documentary. What I love is being out on location with the crew and being alongside the director and trying to sort of solve the problems when you're out on location. So anything that takes me out of the office, sorry, I keep doing that, anything that gets me out of the office on location somewhere in the UK or abroad, that's what gets me excited. We're working on a project at the moment. There's a shoot in San Francisco, so I'm all excited about that, although I can't go. But that sort of thing, that's what I love doing, yeah.
Right, so it's not a matter of you get the brief and you're working in the dark room in Manchester. Yeah, there's a bit of that. Right. I mean, there's quite a lot of that. Yeah. But there's also, hopefully, there's getting out to meet clients, there's going on the shoot, there's going on the location, there's going on recce's. The best thing we find is being brought on really early on into the production, so that we can meet those challenges that all productions have.
and then we can kind of come up with some solutions for that. I think when it doesn't work so much is when you're brought on right at the end, the thing's being shot, and you're kind of trying to save the project. If you can be there, you know, early on, and you can really work with us to make the shots you need, that's when it works best for us. So.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Pleasure.
In the middle is John Turner from Kilogram Animation. You've brought a clip of The Charge of the Light Brigade.
Yeah, obviously this isn't my or anyone I know's work. It's from the 70s, I think. It's a guy called Richard Williams. He's one of the big guys in animation, and it's a live film about the Charge of the Light Brigade. I'll stop that as well. But it was interspersed with some beautiful animations done in crosshatch style to kind of put the action in context. And I thought it was kind of relevant to what I was going to talk about, because instead of just showing the geography of how England came to across Europe to Crimea to fight the Russians against for the Turks, it's actually showing personalities, and it's showing how the English feel about themselves and how they feel about the Russians and the Turkish and the French, and the British are lions, the Russians are bears, the Turkish is a turkey, quite literally. It's a beautiful clip, but it's because we realised that a lot of time, like if we're doing an animation about a computer, it's a box and it's a screen, or if you're doing, we did one about schizophrenia, and it's something that's trapped inside someone's head. So, because you see a lot of what we do is 2D animation, when it's design-led, it means you can, if you don't have something physical there that you can represent, like some water rushing through a city or something apocalyptic, you have to use your designs to represent it in a different way. And so that's the angle I'm taking for animation, that we usually try and take something that might actually be quite dry, but once you explain it in that way, you realise that it is a very interesting subject.
Describe the emotion of it rather than the physical thing.
Yeah.
So shall we watch do you want to play the two clips back to back, or shall we watch the...
Play them back to back, that's fine if you want. Yeah.
Back to back, please. So this is The Charge of the Light Brigade, which John didn't work on.
But if you get a chance to see the whole film, because this is just a tiny clip, let's say, highly recommend it. It's a great film.
So that's just an example of how how animation can bring something abstract to...
I quite like stuff like David Lowe's political cartoons in the 40s.
And this is
things like that. But like I say, this is our stuff. just like to do a lot of different styles as well.
It's very
So
nice.
would you describe yourself as an animator?
Yeah.
And mostly 2D and 3D?
No, actually, I'm more a 3D animator. It's just in our company we've got people who've got a lot of experience of doing 2D and people who've got a few years, but they combine very nicely because the people who've only got a few years are really good animators, and the people who've got a lot can show them some of the tips that you need to do nice 2D animation. But what I was thinking is we do 3D and 2D, but I knew that these guys would have the 3D thing covered, so I thought we should concentrate on the 2D.
And how do you like to work with a company?
How do I like to?
Yeah.
I think it's right. If you, the earlier you can get in, the better, because you know, when it's a done deal, you usually are kind of chasing your tail. It's pretty obvious actually. You like a really nice big budget, as much creative control as possible.
Nice friendly client that likes everything you do.
Yeah.
No modifications to anything.
Yeah. No big arguments over really stupid little points. You know, just a dream. But yeah, to be honest, every now and again, like a little kind of unicorn client turns up, and they are lovely, and they just go, "Yeah, you know what you're doing. You just do it and show us what you." I mean, it's rare, but they do turn up.
So you would prefer someone to just come to you and say, "I need an animation of this. Can you do it?"
Well, you like, because it's also that thing. I think I was watching a Mock 'em and Wise thing where he said that Eddie Braben was good at instead of them having a blank piece of paper, he'd start the idea and then they'd make the idea work. And it's always, you know, it's always easy to start with someone saying, "We're thinking of doing this," and then you can go, "Well, you thought this, thought that," and it kind of develops with you. Because also, you know, nobody wants to be locked out of a process. If they're paying money for you to do something, they don't want you to say, "Right, go away, you don't know anything, and we'll do it." You know, there's got to be some kind of collaboration, but it is that understanding where if you can keep things nice and non-confrontational. But we try, you know, I don't think, the majority of the clients have just been quite, you know, we've got on really well, so.
And the last clip, last little section animation of your clip is something that you did for us. Yeah. And in terms of that, you very kindly did that sort of on spec, with no upfront cash. He was very generous, and we owe him big time. But how often do you work like that?
It's really bad business for me, but I mean, the reason is because Mike was talking about it and thinking, what, animating Aztec design? You think, yeah, I'd love to do that. So sometimes, like I say, it's bad business, but you do it because you like doing it, and you think, oh, it's another one, and I wonder what it turned out like. Because there, I can never remember her name, but there's an animator from the 70s, and she did some beautiful stuff with like African ethnic type African art that it's hard to describe, but it's really bizarre animation as well, but it works with the African art that she was using, and you think, oh yeah, I'd like to do that because it was really distinctive, and you know, you want to keep it interesting, and that's one of the nice things about our side of it, that we do get to work on different things all the time, so it does keep it fresh. But over generous.
Yes, and in terms of budgets, I mean, you said the bigger the better. But what you will work with a company if they've got a very limited budget, or? Well,
because we're talking about, because sometimes you have a variety of budgets, because it does come down to, some people will just say, right, we've got this, and it's the bigger ones pay for the smaller ones, and some people have got little or no money, but they've got a really nice, interesting job. So if you can juggle the big jobs with small jobs, then it evens out to medium jobs. But then again, you know, someone might come and say, we've got no money, and it's a really rubbish thing, and it's going to be really painful to work on, and you're like, well,
no thanks.
Yeah, you wouldn't do that, but like say, if something's interesting and if you can fit it in, then why not? I mean, we're kind of here to animate, and you know, there are easier ways to make money if it was just about money, but we're not just here to make money. So,
and what kind of projects get you excited?
It's the ones where you're doing something fresh, or you kind of, because you're always trying to work out a nice little extra move that you can, or get something a bit more complicated in. If it gives you the space, like some guy has come to us and he's just got a bit of Arabian music, and it's when I say a bit, I mean it is a single, but the way that it's not like Western music where you've got chorus, verse, middle, eight. It's more kind of subtle than that. But the more you listen to it, the more you can kind of take the layers away, and you can see what you can do. And he wants, which is really rare at this moment, to make a music video, which it's been really hard to get financing for music videos. So he said, "Oh, where could you do this?" And I know one of the designers wants to do something that's got an Arabian or an Indian touch to it. So he started designing it, and it's one where you don't have to push anyone, because he will go at it at its full steam, and the others will kind of be carried along as well, because they know at the end of it it's going to be a nice little film. And it's another thing that they can say, well, I've tried this as well. So that's kind of nice and exciting. And then, if you're trying a little bit of different technology, or that, the one you were saying about the one with the face, that sat out where someone said, could you animate face paint onto someone? And we realised we had to do it in the computer, because if you did paint and then take off and paint and take off, you'd destroy the woman's face. And she was a really nice woman as well, so we didn't want to do that. But you are working around all the different ways of kind of getting that effect, and I think it turned out okay as well in the end. It looked quite nice.
Okay.
Great. Okay. And Andy, you've also come from a BBC background, and then a couple of years ago you started your company, 422 South. But you've worked on big projects like Walking with Dinosaurs and... no? Was that not you?
No, the company is actually 23 years old rather than 2 years old. Slight correction. Yeah. Like JP, I began in the BBC as a graphic designer, 10 years ahead of you, JP, actually, like in the early 80s. And
cut paper, that would have been.
It was, indeed, cell animation with no computers at all. So, but in 1989, 1988, with a couple of friends, I started 422, and the company's been going under that name ever since. It's had a few, hiccups and bumps in the road along the way. But during that time, we've spent, I'd say, something like 90% of our working lives working on documentaries, specifically in the fields of science, history, and natural history, which are the big users in terms of content animation for our services. And most of what we do, unlike John, is 3D rather than 2D. It's a slightly different emphasis, it's a slightly different craft and a slightly different mindset. So our showreel, if I were to show you the showreel, you would see that it's got a lot of the kind of things that JP has shown, and a little bit of 2D animation as well. But rather than coming in with our general reel, I thought I'd talk today specifically about one particular area that I'm finding interesting that we're working on. We've been working on for the last 2 years, which is data-based animation. And by data-based animation, it's easier for me to tell you what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean in our case, looking at data visualization in terms of graphs and charts and pie charts and so on. There is a lot of data out there in the world, and I think there's some interesting opportunities now to visualize it. Data which is harvested all around us, particularly using things like GPS, using devices like GPS. There are institutions out there, there are scientific research, there are governments, there are corporations and companies that have a lot of data, and that data is piling up. It hasn't been accessed in any kind of interesting ways until I think we were commissioned to work on a program called Britain from Above for the BBC a couple of years ago. And almost as an afterthought, the director of this series asked us to put some data together to show GPS traces. And that, as it were, started our relationship with visualizing data. Now, I'm going to show some clips of that in a minute, but simultaneously with that, we started to get involved with another type of data, and this was specifically scientific research related to underwater landscapes. So we had an opportunity to work on a film called Drain the Oceans, which began with a sort of conversation with Steve Burns, who was then running the show at National Geographic. And we started to look at the volume of new research that was being done on the ocean floors, and that triggered the possibility of creating these landscapes in computer animation. And then Drain the Oceans has led to other similar projects. One we're working on right now, which I can't tell you what it is, but it's another Drain the project, with the idea of revealing sort of the biggest canyons, the biggest mountains that are on the planet, because they're not being eroded. They're all down there. Our animations show them in high levels of realism, but with scientific accuracy. And this, if you like, is the key aspect of all this, that it has veracity, it has accuracy at the heart of it, which for most of the scientific broadcast channels is quite important. So that led on to a project about the Bermuda Triangle, where we drained the water away and we found out what's underneath. And right now, or supposedly underneath, according to the survey data. And right now we're going on to produce similar landscape, based on real data projects. Another one which is called Transparent Ocean, where we turn the water clear, and you can now see not only the underwater features, but the masses of animals, fish, deep diving sperm whales in relation to these underwater features, and the currents that flow through them in the form of clouds. We're showing these in the form of flowing clouds like dry ice. And we're in the middle of that project. So what I'm going to do is run a set of clips. We're only allowed 2 minutes, so there's 1 minute's worth showing some of this landscape material. Then I'll move on to talk about the GPS stuff. So if you want to show the first clip. So they're all computer-generated clips, but they're all based on real topographic data. So anything, even the software we're using even puts the sun in the right place at a particular time of day. It's a specific landscaping generating software. And the software understands that the computer model it's creating is a large sphere called the Earth, unlike ordinary 3D modeling software where an object that you create can be any size at all. It doesn't, there's no intrinsic understanding or relationship between a single light source like the sun and an object that you place on this Earth's surface. Anyway, so the other area, unless you wanted to...
I just have a quick question. So does that mean that you don't actually you don't get visual film of these locations and then get asked to map them?
No, you don't.
It's all working from...
It's called procedural animation, where the software allows you to dress the landscape and light the landscape using tools within the software. So you basically look for a certain type of rock, and it will basically, we can create different types of rock according to what would really be there, whether it's got striations in it, whether it's sedimentary or whether it's been formed igneous, yeah, some type. Well, some of the ones we've been creating have got sort of boulders set into it because that's the way the rock was really created. And, we require feedback from the scientific consultants to make sure that we get that stuff right.
Right.
And then the rest of it's down to, lighting it in an exciting and interesting way and making it feel moody and big, wide-angle lenses. Replicating aerial photography camera moves. I'm no big fan of cameras that swoop around as you see in a lot of cheap architectural visualizations, much better to replicate the grammar of real photography, and specifically with aerial photography, where you basically get relatively slow-moving shots that you just have to cut. To make a sequence, you're going to have to keep cutting. And that's what we do. Even though in our computers we can fly the camera as fast as we like, you don't, because it completely destroys credibility.
So the aim is to make it look as realistic as possible, as if it had been shot by a documentary crew.
And the simple reason for that is you don't want anybody to think about how it's created. For this kind of shot, you just want people to accept it as it's telly. It doesn't matter how it was made, and if they can suspend their disbelief in that way, then hopefully they're listening to whatever the narration is, and they're getting the big feel. I mean, with most of this stuff, the big feel is it's huge. I mean, that is the message, the stuff that's being revealed for the first time. I mean, 70% of the Earth's surface has never been seen. Amazing fact. We're, if you like, coming as close as you can to see it, because as soon as you take a submersible down there, you see about 5 feet. Yeah. So, that's the gag with this stuff.
Just thinking a lot with camera work is there because it works anyway, traditional camera work. So if you use those lessons, then you get a better effect anyway than a swoop. Because it always looks terrible, doesn't it, when it's swooping around.
It destroys the credibility, and it looks like a graphic.
Yeah.
So we don't want it. The last thing you want to do is for anybody to say that's great animation. I don't want them to think it as animation. So this next stuff is clearly animation. This is the other use for data, where we've harvested largely GPS global positioning satellite data. Began with Britain from above. Began with a bunch of data that came from taxi companies, from the Air Traffic Control Service, from the Coast Guard for ships. And this was intercut with aerial photography, again, looking down on the country from above. And it came together in a surprisingly successful way with good music and with a relatively light narration, which didn't overburden these shots with information. Because again, what you really want is you just want to allow the sort of emotional impact of it to come across. And the major feeling that came across from an audience, this is a BBC One audience, a general audience, not a scientifically dedicated audience, was, oh wow, isn't that cool? And there was this kind of visceral feeling of, it's amazing that stuff goes on all the time around us that we can't see, and how it's amazing that it works. Most of our lives, we don't see the things that work. We know about the things that don't work, but there's systems and energy going on out all the time, which is working, and it's complex, and it's only revealed through this kind of technique. And And as a result of seeing some of these patterns of movement, for instance with the taxis, it became clear that you could see at a certain time of day the taxi drivers stop using the principal streets and start using the little back streets. Now, I mean, I suppose you might have guessed that, but there was no evidence to bear that out. But when you look at the animation, you can see it, and you can see in some of the plane animations how scary it is to land at Heathrow Airport, because the planes are coming in like this and they're crossing over each other and they're looping in kind of mad, whirling flight paths. And you can see how crossing the English Channel on a ferry, you're just you're intercutting between these big supertankers coming up and down. Anyway, so that has led to Germany from above 2, the Netherlands from above, which we're about to start work on, and a similar show for America, which we're in the middle of at the moment, and hopefully others to come. But anyway, so I thought we may as well run that one if we can. safer to stay at home.
It's lovely, that stuff. I remember seeing that on the show. Yeah, it's beautiful.
So is that the reaction you? Well, this is a general question, I suppose. Is wow, isn't that cool? The reaction that you want your work to have from a viewing audience?
Yeah, pretty well. I think so. It's a completely different, serving a completely different purpose from the first clips I was showing. This is, I think, it's an interesting, sort of almost a new medium. It's almost like a new camera that you can point at life and see things in different ways. And I think we've only just really begun with it. And I don't think it needs to be I don't think it only works when intercut with aerial photography, for instance. I think it's, there are projects which I want to make which will dig deeper into data. And it also, I think it has a big life on the internet as well. There's a lot of interest in data visualization at the moment. It's quite a hot topic. I think the Channel 4 was saying recently that data is the new oil. You know, I think that was the expression. And I definitely see us doing more of this.
And in terms of, you said that you're going to have like Germany from Above and Germany from Above 2, or that they've already been completed.
Yeah.
And so was the From Above series something that came from in-house, or did someone approach you to make it?
We were approached by Lion Television first time round, and then the others have come from different angles. The German production, I don't think I'm talking out of turn when I say it was not licensed. It was still called German, it was called Deutschland von oben. But what's going on between Lion TV and ZDF, it's not for me to say, but you probably would find it hard to stop somebody creating a relatively generic idea like that. But they used very similar techniques, and they hired us to do some very similar things. And we've written special code which enables the data. The data arrives with us in vast amounts. I mean, it comes from public institutions, as I say, from companies, from scientists working in the field, bird migrations and so on. And they dump sacksfuls of data on us, and it's utterly overwhelming. And our first job is to try and make sense of it and find out where the story is. Because it could be that the story is a 24-hour period, or it could be that it all happens in 1 hour or in 6 months. You just don't know where the cycle, where the most interesting things are going to be expressed. So we have to wrangle this data and to get to the point where we can visualize it in some form, and then we all look at it, and the producers look at it and they say, is this story working for us? And then we go ahead and finish the shots, and we put again cameras into the scene once we've created it to make it televisual. So there's slight drifts on it. The shots are very rarely straight down. They're usually oblique, and we put lighting on there which is reflective of different types of day, the sun rising and setting and so on.
And so these are clearly big budget projects.
Well, they are when you put a lot of these sequences together, but the cost per sequence is relatively small. I mean, we were talking probably a sequence. In fact, I can tell you exactly, because we're just about to start work on the Netherlands project, and we're quoting about £2,000 per sequence, and a sequence could be up to a minute.
Wow, so it's not as expensive.
Not as expensive. If you were to come and ask me to do one from a standing start, that would be more expensive, especially if there were no way of knowing that the data is usable. Because, as I say, there's a lot. We could spend 4 or 5 days just getting to the bottom of what the data is showing. So, but in the context of a big production, in this case, the budgets for these were north of £120,000–130,000
for the whole.
In most cases, these are series of 3 1-hours. I mean, you're not going to get rich on it, but it's obviously easier to set up systems that you can then get into a bit of a production line with, and that's more cost effective.
And do you go looking for the data, or does the producer come with the data for you? How does that work?
Well, the first thing I say to anybody that's contemplating a project like this is get the feelers out now. Get researchers working on data, because it's going to take a long time. And it's not that it takes a long time to find the right people. Getting those people to give you the data, because if you're running a taxi company, the last thing you want to be doing is screwing around, opening your computers and sending data to some bunch of media types. Or if you're a busy government institution, you might get round to it in 6 months' time. So you start the process as early as you possibly can. And a lot of the leads you get are, they don't. We've had stuff, and you look at it and we'll go, that's not very interesting, is it? It's not really very intriguing or anything, doesn't raise any questions, it's all a bit dull, and you dump it. Others kind of surprise you and have a strange beauty to them, you know, which is almost worth doing just to stand back and look at it.
Yeah, just for that, oh wow, isn't that cool reaction.
It almost feels like that super slow-mo or speeded up photography, isn't it? It's taking you out of the time frame that we live in into a sort of super time, hyper time.
Yeah,
and it serves the same sort of purpose as that. What was that guy who did a series on it? He works on Hamster, whatever his name is, Top Gear.
Oh, Hammond.
Hammond. He did a show, didn't he? Almost
the explosion. You could see the shockwave coming out.
Time warp was it's fascinating.
Yeah, it was really good.
So, for Andy, for you, getting on board at the beginning is also critical.
Or before the beginning.
So before it's even been pitched to
well, because I
broadcaster?
sometimes pitch the ideas. That's how I get in early now. Right. I'm developing ideas with independent production companies in partnership, and because I know that we can do interesting things, I can't expect producers out there to be 100% on top of what's happening in our world. And so I say, well, look, I can see this working, and because I go to the various festivals and shows, I keep my ear to the ground in terms of what the channels are looking for, and I make the connections. I don't try and write the editorial. I'm not a shooter of live action, but I do help get projects to proposal stage, and I'll go and meet with the commissioning editors and try and get them. We've just succeeded in exactly that, an idea that I came up with, working with an indie, and that's just been confirmed by National Geographic. So hopefully that'll be one for next year. But yes, under other, but there is actually an argument for saying coming in right at the end is useful in a completely different way, because what will happen is the project is already, it's got a momentum, it's in the cutting room, the way that the graphics is going to fit, if it's graphics or animation, is going to fit into the show becomes clearer by then, and there is less time for sort of wifty wafting about and going, and wasting time on sort of unfulfilled exploration. It's a much more focused relationship then, and in fact, in terms of cost effectiveness, it can be a lot better. So it's the in-between projects are the most dangerous, really. You know what I mean? Where you are engaged. It's a long process. You end up spending much more time than you need to, and and you end up feeling like you've probably spent twice the budget by the time you actually get to the end of it.
Yeah, and. Do you find the same then, that you can also get more focused if you're brought in at the end?
Well, yes, it has its own sort of agenda then, and it's about getting the show on air and hitting the broadcast deadline. So yeah, it concentrates everyone's mind and production's mind as well as ours. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Andy. There's advantages in that, in a sense, because you can't mess around so much. If you've got a 2-week deadline, it's about making choices really quickly rather than sitting around and having lots of coffee and thinking about it, and doing lots of modifications to things.
There is a downside at your end, though, when you're working on high-end visual effects, because there are so many processes that you just can't shortcut. And there's a big VFX project that's just been finished for the BBC about Egypt. I don't know whether it's going out now. It's certainly about to. We had
the photography, the aerial photography, finding new pyramids and things.
And the art director on that, who's a friend and colleague, he was finishing it on, and this has been in production for something like 9 months. He was finishing it on 5 o'clock in the morning on the day of transmission. I mean, he just looked like he'd been dragged through a hedge backwards, bags under his eyes, hair standing on end. He looked like The Walking Dead because of that.
Can you charge more for that, or is it just a set budget and that's it?
No.
Yeah. So if there are filmmakers that want to use your talent, how do they just call you, email you? What's the best way of getting in touch and starting that relationship with you?
That's about it, really. Yeah.
Well, we've all got websites. I mean,
It's about working collaboratively. Really early on or really late, but getting in touch is what it's all about. And even if you think, well, you know what, I don't really know what I want, and I don't think I've got much money, blah blah blah. Don't not pick up the phone. Pick up the phone and call, and we can always chat. We don't charge for chatting. Well, we don't anyway.
And can you then, from your side, can you bring, if you really like a project and you're really passionate about it, is there any opportunity for you to bring money to the table in terms of getting some kind of funding yourselves? And I don't know if that's...
From our point of view, not yet, no, but Andy...
We have done that, yeah. We have done that. We've worked at cost on the basis that we have a little bit of investment in the project. It's, you know, it's risky. It's a bit like doing any work up front for nothing. You would only do it under circumstances where you've got to try and feed the, you know, you've got to feed the children, and you bet some cash flow is better than none at all. And there's an opportunity, there's a possibility of a share of the back end. I mean, in the mind of the production or production company, there's obviously an expectation, a hope that will engage the CGI company more, because they'll be, you know, they have an interest in making it good, and to some extent that's the truth. It's not my favourite way of working.
But it is a possibility.
It's a possibility.
And this question's for all of you as well. You're happy to work with small independent producers, production companies? There's no sort of prerequisite as to who you will and won't work with, or?
Personally, absolutely not, no. No, there's no prerequisite at all. No judgment made at all, no. The more the merrier, and the more variety the better, from our point of view, yeah.
John?
Yeah, I mean, you know, someone with a lot of money can have a terrible idea, and someone with a little bit of money can have a great idea.
Yeah.
You know, it's down to the idea rather than the size.
Yeah, I'd say the same. Currently I'm working with two companies that are, in one case, a one-man band, and the other, it's a husband and wife team, and, you know, with on some quite substantial projects. Other cases, it's direct commissions from the broadcaster at the opposite end of the scale, and indies in between. And the budgets for us, you know, £2,000. We do work for £2,000 up to, you know, whatever, £250,000 type of budgets. And I won't turn my nose up at anything, because you never know that the £2,000 job you're doing now might not lead to a £20,000 or £100,000 job at some time.
It is like the data thing you're going, that when you look at how you ended up at a certain place, you might be, it starts off and you're going, no, that'd never lead there, but it does.
Can do.
So, do we have any questions from the audience? Anything that hasn't been covered, or anything? Yeah. Oh, we have a microphone. I know. Just in case I can't hear you.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, two of you mentioned coming in at the end, and you actually mentioned 2 weeks. Whenever I think of animation, I think of it as being a very long process. So if you did have 2 weeks to perhaps do 5 minutes of animation, would that really be possible?
Well, it depends what that animation involves. If it's a stop frame of the cup going across the table, it might work. But and again, if it's 3D or integration with live action, or if it's 2D, I mean, it's such a broad word, animation. So it's worth having a chat, but it depends entirely on the shot and what you're trying to do with the animation, what you're trying to say with it, and there's a bunch of media that we can use to use that. You know, there's not, we don't funnel into always directing it towards an electronic solution or 2D solution or a live action solution. It's about using everything that we can get our hands on to make it work and do the job. That's what I would say.
It's the approvals process as well, because you might not actually get 2 weeks of solid work in there, because it might be that you get a week in and they go, oh yeah, we were just thinking if you could just add a load of...
Yeah, so
and it's easy, that, isn't it? And it's like, no, it's really not. Yeah. But so it depends on how much they know about animation and what's possible.
I think it's also worth pointing out that this is related to the question of how much does a minute of animation cost. In as much as if you were to create in 3D CGI an object, maybe it's a simple representation of a building that you're making a film about, you can fly the CGI camera around that building and create 5 minutes of shots relatively easily. If you then want to show the walls falling off, or show internal stairwells, or to have a flock of birds landing on the roof and so on, which could also be encompassed within 5 minutes, then you're talking about specific complex complications, which would make it, I'd say, impossible. There's an aspect to CGI as well that most people will be familiar with. It's called rendering, which is the computer processing. And what's happened is the computers have got vastly more capable and more powerful than they used to be, but the software demands that are made on them have kind of more or less kept the same. So in other words, we've got the same relationship with the computing power that we had 10 years ago. We're making, so you could still give yourself a monumental problem over 2 weeks, even if the animation were relatively simple, because you're aspiring to render something with a level of finish which the computers find really hard. And even with most of our companies have got what we call a render farm, which means a number of computers laced together. Even with relatively powerful arrays, you can still hit time problems. And the computers then can play tricks on you, like screwing up or power cuts overnight, and it just gets too scary sometimes.
So you would do a 2-week coming at the end of a project, but 2 weeks would be like the bare minimum of a very simple graphical animation.
I'd be surprised if you could do 5 minutes in 2 weeks.
5 minutes is the problem.
Yeah.
I can't think of 5 minutes that you'd really seriously commission.
Which would be interesting enough.
That would be interesting enough that you could achieve in 2 weeks. Exactly right.
Yeah.
So I think most of us would probably walk away from such an opportunity, to put it that way, politely, of course.
It's not quite what you've been talking about, but I'm interested in examples of where animation has actually really made a major contribution to storytelling. And I would sort of exclude data, actually, in this particular question. And the question is, are there films which you admire, or a film in each case, which you admire where the animation or the graphics, because all of you are sort of come from graphics, don't you, in a sense, more than drawing stories, which you admire, where you feel that the animation really enhanced the storytelling. And I'm not talking about Walking with Bashir, which is all animation. Something in which there's been a transition between animation and live action in a documentary, which you say, hey, that really works, I really like that, I admire that. Could you answer that question?
Yeah, we worked, when I was working for the previous company, we worked on a film which I completely cannot remember the name of now. It was about 2 guys that went up a mountain, and one of them slipped and fell and was hanging off for 6 hours. Touching the Void. Thank you. So we did about 35 shots in Touching the Void that we hope were invisible. They shot the plates in the Alps because they couldn't afford to go to Chile. And then we put those plates into still photography shots of the Chilean mountains. We the set extended quite a small crevasse that they shot in, and for the wide shots extended that digitally. And I think in that case, you weren't aware of the CGI in there, and it helped the story because it made it look bigger, it made it look more epic. It gave the place a setting. So I think, but there are films like the Star Wars films that have been ruined by too much reliance on digital solutions, and they aren't always the solution at all. And in those cases, I think those big budget films which use CGI to the detriment of the story or the plot or character development, you just walk out cold from a cinema. So I think it's just about applying it as a medium in its own right, with an appropriateness that it should have. And in Touching the Void, I think it did have an appropriateness. It was a solution to a problem. They couldn't go to Chile, so we helped them out. And I think that's where it comes into its own. It should be about what you cannot shoot. It should be about showing something that's not, you can't go out and pick a camera and shoot. You can't, there isn't a Titanic at sea, so one of the solutions is a digital solution, having a digital Titanic in the shots in our reel to extend those shots, make it more epic. Or you build a massive great set that costs £250,000 like they did for Titanic, the movie, or a bit of, 3/4 size, wasn't it? So it's about using it appropriately, I think I would say.
It depends on your definition of animation, but the kid stays in the picture I thought was great because they just had stills and it really did bring it alive with that. Persepolis isn't a documentary, but if you can get someone to watch it, it's one of the best films. It's incredible, and it really brings the whole idea of what happened in Iran to life. There's a short called, I think something like George Learns Self-Defense, and it's about George Bush's attitude to guns and wars and stuff like that. But it's a very clever little film. It's really funny. It looks like a 1950s cartoon. And if you could ever find it on the internet,
Is that cool?
it's like something like George's self-defense lesson. It just starts with this guy getting beaten up in an alleyway, so he picks up a gun and just starts shooting everyone. And it's not too in your face about what it's about, but it's really funny because it's you're just like guns will sort it out. And
Right.
Pardon?
It's influenced by the Cuban guy, wonderful.
Probably. I mean, yeah. I don't know exactly. But it's a really nice one. Yeah. But yeah, I'd say the picture would be the first answer.
So I'm going to refer to a film that my team worked on a few years ago called Murder Castle. And it was about the US's first serial killer, H.H. Holmes. Really spooky story, Victorian story. This guy built a house dedicated to murdering women, and he had secret rooms and chambers and things. Just really.
Was that in America?
It's in Chicago, at the time of the Chicago exhibition.
Yeah.
And we were told that we were hired to sort of tell this story of how he, engineered this room. The director didn't want to use live action. There was a bit of reenactment in there, but there was going to be a lot of this stuff, and it had to be quite descriptive, and in a way that live action couldn't be because of the complex layout of the room. So, and we all thought that conventional CGI was too cold. So we ended up creating a physical doll's house, which the side came off, and then we had little figures about this big that were based on dolls that we dressed in Victorian costume. And we stop framed. It was very clunky stop frame, and shot it with very cheap camera, and showed the murderer carrying this. Like the murderer carries his little doll, drops her down this, and then we dressed it all with scratches and vignetted it, and forced the contrast so the blacks and the whites were bleaching. And it felt weird. I mean, it was scary watching it because the whole thing had such a spooky feel to it. So I think in as much as it addressed the issue of imparting information in a really clear way, but utterly reinforced the mood and atmosphere of the film. So I it's not something we've been able to do since, perhaps for obvious reasons, as a technique, but I thought it hit the spot.
It's about imparting some sort of emotion too. A lot of CGI is emotionless, isn't it? Cold, but it's about trying to enhance the whatever show it is, a film or show, a documentary, getting some sort of emotive feel to having a reason for the shot, really.
I mean, inside the human body, when it showed the...
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Anyone else with a question? No? I saw a short yesterday called Abuelas, which is about the grandmothers in Argentina and their disappeared family members. And that was like filmed, but it was also filmed stop animation, so it was the actual grandmother. And it was really powerful.
That's a nice technique, yeah.
Because it was actual live acting, but also using props as well to sort of tell the story. I don't know if anybody saw that, but it's if you do get a chance to see that, it's really beautiful short. I wasn't expecting it because I went in sort of open to whatever it was going to be.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? And using lots of different techniques, I think, is what's exciting for us as well. Not always going back to what what we normally do, which is there in reserve, which is great. But trying to do things differently is interesting.
Yeah. Can we give you the mic just so Kevin can hear? Thank you.
Yeah, it comes from the NFTS animation department, and I run the documentary department, and we've had talking a lot about with the Royal College, about the new interest in documentary animation, really, documentary and animation. And I think it's a really interesting area.
Yeah,
she did the animation in that's very good. Documentary is not so good, but it's really good and it's interesting. It's an interesting area. That's why I asked the question before.
So, do you think that animation and CGI and visual effects, is it getting cheaper and more accessible for producers, or do you think it's going even more expensive?
That's a really interesting question. If I go first. No, it isn't particularly, but what you get, the end result is much more, well, it depends what sort of techniques you use, as again, the caveat being, I guess from our point of view, sort of using live action and embedding CGI into it. Like you were saying about computer speed, you always think, well, it's much faster, it's going to be much faster to render, but actually the expectation of the shots is so much greater that it actually takes the same amount of time to render. So, I've forgotten the question now, what was it?
Whether animation's getting cheaper and therefore more accessible for everyone.
I think generally, yes, because there's more of it. I mean, a few years ago there wasn't any CGI in documentary, it's just too expensive. So that's definitely changed.
I think the big thing that's changed is, I would answer yes, for two reasons really. One is that budgets have gone down, and therefore everything is funded less than it used to be. The viewing public is not suspending its standards just because a film is made on a low budget. The audience doesn't sit there and say, the graphics, the animation looked great considering the budget they had. It either looks good or it doesn't. And the other is the democratization of the technology. I mean, when we first started, we were buying pieces of kit that cost £250,000, and you had to have an air-conditioned apparatus room. Now, the stuff that we spent that money on, you could get probably thrown in if you buy a 250 quid laptop. And suddenly somebody can do something in their bedroom as a hobbyist, and a lot of filmmakers quite reasonably go to their nephew in their bedroom to get their 1 minute animation because the lad is enthusiastic and talented and he's got the kit to do it, and why not? And he exports files instead of high resolution videotape like we used to. So the bar to entry has been lowered so fundamentally, and that's affected our ability as individuals to run large successful companies in this area because that whole slice of work has been taken away. So we now provide a service for kind of, generally speaking, with intermediate and higher level budgets. But, I would also argue with a level of professionalism, additional professionalism and reliability thrown in that you might not, the lad in his bedroom might suddenly decide that he wants to run off with his girlfriend instead of doing the work.
Or the one computer crashes and then all your data's gone.
Yeah.
So there is,
or using probably unlicensed software anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look on YouTube or Vimeo, there's some scarily good stuff. It's the French universities seem to turn out incredible students every year. The Meat Book and the guy who did do you see the one where it's like Donkey Kong attacking New York, or it's all kind of pixel based. It's a beautiful piece of effects work, and I don't know who funded it or if it was just a student piece, but very nice. But like I say, it kind of, I always thought it was like with punk that everyone was in a band, but now anyone can be an animator because the software's there and it's just down to talent. But the things, the really big things, they take money still.
They take an infrastructure, I think, is the key thing, and that's where we will still hopefully have an appeal going forward. But no, I mean the margins are down. You just can't make hay now with the sun shines in the way you used to be able to get you through the periods where you're not busy. That's why companies we were just talking earlier about both of our companies having gone bankrupt in the last 18 months because of exactly those kind of issues. The margins are down. We're trying clearly to be as cost effective and competitive as we possibly can, but it's, you know, it ain't easy.
No, I think everyone, producers, filmmakers, animators, or, you know, everyone is kind of hit by the reduction in budgets. There is a need for content, and there is space for content, but probably the budgets have been chopped up so much as well, and everybody's fighting for the same piece of pie.
I mean, the only other way to make it work for us, we're not in the right city, being in Bristol, to do a lot of commercials or feature film work. It would be nice to be able to supplement the budgets by doing that. But, you know, there is corporate work out there. There are people who will come. I mean, oddly enough, the database stuff I was showing, suddenly the corporates are interested in it. The telecoms companies are interested in having us do it and things like that. So, you know, that's a little welcome relief from the pressure of working on tight broadcast budgets all the time. So, you know, you seek those supplementary sources of income wherever you can in order to fund your ability to respond to the broadcast opportunities when they're put in front of us, because that's really where I prefer to work on broadcast projects, which I have some emotional engagement with.
And do you do any crossover work into sort of web stuff for productions that you've been commissioned to do? Do you also do work on the graphics for like the web platforms or mobile platforms or sort of the digital platforms?
Not within the last 12 months that we set up our company. We're totally open to doing that. And we didn't previously in the company that, as I say, went bust, that I was an employee of. But it's an interesting new area for us, actually. And like you were saying, Andy, you know, corporate areas as well, and advertising. It's something we'd like to expand into more than we do at present, because of the squeeze on that everyone's feeling on documentary production.
I was looking at, we did some web stuff, but I was thinking about, is it called YouView or IPTV now? Where instead of watching TV and being on your phone, looking up who's in what, you can get it up on your screen, and they've got loads of data kind of bubbles coming up as well.
Right.
But I don't know, maybe that's the way into it, because sometimes when you watch a documentary, it's actually better to have a Q&A afterwards as well, to explore what's going on and pick through it. Sorry, that I might be going off on a tangent actually, but I was just thinking in general, that's maybe a thing that opens up as well.
So the whole sort of 360 idea of a production now is certainly sort of uppermost in producers' minds, I think. So I guess we need to get across that. Yeah.
Okay. There's any more questions from the audience? No?
Oh yeah. Yeah, if you want to stick it up, it is a really nice one.
Well,
But
we
I
have
don't
time.
know.
We have time, so what is this again?
I think it's New York, and it's like it is like the old Space Invaders and Donkey Kong and all the old arcade games attacking New York. I don't know if this is in front of it, but someone has got, you know, he knows his stuff, or she knows his stuff about how to do it.
Sonia will pick up on this.
So we did it.
So I just want to say, if there's no more questions from the audience, I just want to say thank you to our panel, and thank you for coming and listening and watching, and hopefully it's been worthwhile for you and for everyone that's been here.
Definitely. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sweetie for your Thomas.
Oh, cheers.